Hey guys, it's me, Poppy Rain here, coming to you with a new video. Today's video is going to be another story from the Book of Children's Classics. Just to give you guys an idea, the only stories we have left in this book are Pippi Longstocking, Encyclopedia Brown, Matilda, and Sebastian. So today we are going to be reading Pippi Longstocking from Pippi Longstocking by Astrid Lindgren. As usual, we're going to be doing I'm not going to be reading the whole about section, just the important parts. As this is not a full story, this is just parts of a story. About Pippi Longstocking. Astrid Lindgren is often asked how she came to write about Pippi Longstocking. In 1941, my 7-year-old daughter, Karen, was sick in bed with pneumonia. And one evening, she asked me to tell her a story about Pippi Longstocking. I asked her who Pippi Longstocking was. I just began the story, and since it was a strange name, it turned out to be a strange girl as well. A few years later, when Astrid Lindgren was recuperating from a sprained ankle, she wrote the stories down. When she sent the manuscript to a publisher, 2 years later, she knew it was an unorthodox subject for a children's book, and added the note, "In hope that you won't notify the Children's Welfare Committee." Whoops, sorry guys. This is the story of Pippi Longstocking. Pippi moves to Villa Kula. Way out at the end of the little town was an old overgrown garden, and in the garden was an old house. And in the house lived Pippi Longstocking. She was 9 years old, and she lived there all alone. She had no mother and no father, and that was of course very nice, because there was no one to tell her to go to bed just when she was having the most fun, and no one who could make her take cod liver oil when she'd much prefer caramel candy. Her father had bought the old house in the garden many years ago. He thought he would live there with Pippi when he grew old and couldn't sail the seas any longer. And then this annoying thing had to happen. That he was blown into the ocean, and while Pippi was waiting for him to come back, she went straight home to Villa Kula. That was the name of the house. It stood there, ready and waiting for her. One lovely summer evening, she had said goodbye to all the sailors on her father's boat. They were all fond of Pippi, and she of them. 2 things she took with her from the ship: a little monkey whose name was Mr. Nielsen. He was a present from her father, and a big suitcase full of gold pieces. Pippi was a remarkable child. The most remarkable thing about her was that she was so strong. She was so very strong that in the whole wide world there was not a single police officer as strong as she. Why? She could lift a whole horse if she wanted to. And she wanted to. She had a horse of her own that she had bought with one of her many gold pieces the day she came to Villa Kula. She had always longed for a horse, and now here he was, living on the porch. When Pippi wanted to drink her afternoon coffee there, she simply lifted him down into the garden. Beside Villa Kula was another garden and another house. In that house lived a father and mother and 2 charming children, a boy and a girl. The boy's name was Tommy, and the girl's name was Anika. Tommy and Anika played nicely with each other in their garden, but they had often wished for a playmate. While Pippi was still sailing the ocean with her father, they often used to hang over the fence and say to each other, "Isn't it silly that nobody ever moves into that house? Somebody ought to live there. Somebody with children." On that lovely summer evening, when Pippi, for the first time, stepped over the threshold of Villa Villacula, Tommy and Anika were not at home. They had no idea that anybody had moved into the house next door. On the first day after they came home again, they stood by the gate, looking out onto the street, and even then they didn't know that there actually was a playmate so near. Just as they were standing there, considering what they should do, and wondering whether anything exciting was likely to happen, or whether it was going to be one of those dull days when they couldn't think of anything to play. Just then the gate of Villa Villacula opened, and a little girl stepped out. She was the most remarkable girl Tommy and Anika had ever seen. She was Miss Pippi Longstocking, out for her morning promenade. This is the way she looked. Her hair, the color of carrot, was braided in 2 tight braids and stuck straight out. Her nose was the shape of a very small potato and was dotted all over with freckles. It must be admitted that the mouth under this nose was a very wide one, with strong white teeth. Her dress was rather unusual. Pippi herself had made it. She had meant it to be blue, but there wasn't quite enough blue cloth, so Pippi had sewed little red pieces on it here and there. On her long, thin legs, she wore a pair of long stockings, one brown and the other black, and she had a pair of black shoes that were exactly twice as long as her feet. These shoes her father had bought for her in South America, so that Pippi could have something to grow into, and she never wanted to wear any others. But the one thing that made Tommy and Anika open their eyes widest of all was the monkey sitting on the strange girl's shoulder. It was a little monkey, dressed in blue pants, yellow jacket, and a white straw hat. "Do you live here all alone?" Anika said anxiously. "Of course not," said Pippi. "Mr. Nielsen and the horse live here too." "Yes, but don't you have any mother or father here?" "No, not the least tiny bit of one," said Pippi happily. "But who tells you when to go to bed at night, and things like that?" asked Anika. "I tell myself," said Pippi. "First, I tell myself in a nice friendly way. Then, if I don't mind, I tell myself again more sharply. And if I still don't mind, then I'm in for a spanking. See?" Tommy and Anika didn't see it all, but they thought maybe it was a good way. Pippi goes to the circus. A circus had come to the little town, and all the children were begging their mothers and fathers for permission to go. Of course, Tommy and Anika asked to go too, and their kind father immediately gave them some money. Clutching it tightly in their hands, they rushed over to Pippi's. She was on the porch with her horse, braiding his tail into tiny pigtails and tying each one with red ribbon. "I think it's his birthday today," she announced, "so he has to be all dressed up." "Pippi," said Tommy, all out of breath because he had been running so fast. "Pippi, Do you want to go with us to the circus? I can go with you most anywhere, answered Pippi. But whether I can go to the circus or not, I don't know. Because I don't know what a circus is. Does it hurt? Silly, said Tommy. Of course it doesn't hurt. It's fun. Horses and clowns and pretty ladies that walk the tightrope. But it costs money, said Anika, opening her small fist to see if her shiny $half and the quarters were still there. I'm rich as a troll, said Pippi, so I guess I can buy a circus all right. Circus. But it'll be crowded here if I have more horses. The clowns and the pretty ladies. I could keep it in the laundry. But it's harder to know what to do with the horses. Oh, don't be silly, said Tommy. You don't buy a circus. It costs money to go and look at it, see? Preserve us, cried Pippi, and shut her eyes tightly. It costs money to look, and here I go around goggling all day long. Goodness knows how much money I've goggled up already. Then little by little she opened her eyes very carefully and rolled around and around in her head. Cost what it may, she said. I must take a look. At least Tommy and Nika managed to explain to Pippi that the circus really was, what the circus really was, and she took some gold pieces out of her suitcase. Then she put on her hat, which was as big as a millstone, and off they went. There were crowds of people outside the circus tent, and a long line at the ticket window. But at last, it was Pippi's turn. She stuck her head through the window and stared at the dear old lady sitting there. How much does it cost to look at you? Pippi asked. The old lady was a foreigner, did not understand what Pippi meant, and answered in broken Swedish. Little girl, it costs $1.25 in the grandstand, and 75 cents on the benches, and 25 for standing room. Now, Tommy interrupted and said that Pippi wanted a 75-cent ticket, but Pippi put down a gold piece, and the old lady looked suspiciously at it. She bit it too to see if it was genuine. At last she was convinced that it really was gold, and gave Pippi her ticket, and a great deal of change in silver. What would it do with all these nasty little white coins? Asked Pippi disgustedly. Keep them, and then I can look at you twice. In the standing room. As Pippi absolutely refused to accept any change, the lady changed her ticket to one for the grandstand, and gave Tommy and Anika grandstand tickets too, without her having to pay a single penny. In that way, Pippi, Tommy, and Anika came to sit on some beautiful red chairs right next to the ring. Tommy and Anika turned around several times to wave to their schoolmates, who were sitting much further away. This is a remarkable place, said Pippi, looking around in astonishment. But see, they've spilled sawdust all over the floor. Not that I'm over fussy myself, but that does look careless to me. Tommy explained that all circuses had sawdust on the floor for the horses to run around in. On the platform nearby, the circus band suddenly began to play a thundering march. Pippi clapped her hands wildly and jumped up and down with delight. Does it cost money to hear too? She asked. Or can you do that for nothing? At the moment, the curtain in front of the performer's entrance was drawn aside, and the ringmaster, with a black frock coat, with a whip in his hand, came running in, followed by 10 white horses with red plumes on their head. The ringmaster cracked his whip and all the horses galloped around the ring. Then he cracked it again, and all the horses stood still with their front feet up on the railing around the ring. One of them had stopped directly in front of the children. Anika didn't like to have a horse so near her, and drew back in her chair as far as she could. But Pippi leaned forward and took the horse's right foot in her hands. "Hello there," she said. "My horse sent you his best wishes. It's his birthday today, too. But he has bows on his tail instead of on his head." Luckily, she dropped the foot before the ringmaster cracked his whip again, because then all the horses jumped away from the railing and began to run around the ring. When the act was over, the ringmaster bowed politely, and the horses ran out. In an instant, the curtain opened again. For a coal-black horse. On its back stood a beautiful lady dressed in green silk tights. The program said her name was Miss Carmencita. The horse trotted around in the sawdust, and Miss Carmencita stood calmly on his back and smiled. But then something happened. Just as the horse passed Pippi's seat, something came swishing through the air, and it was none other than Pippi herself. And there she stood on the horse's back, behind Miss Carmencita. At first, Miss Carmencita was so astonished that she nearly fell off the horse. Then she got mad. She began to strike out with her hands behind her back to make Pippi jump off, but that didn't work. "Take it easy," said Pippi. "Do you think you're the only one who can have any fun? Other people have paid too, haven't they?" Then Miss Carmencita tried to jump off herself, but that didn't work either, because Pippi was holding her tightly around the waist. At that, the audience couldn't help laughing. They thought it was funny to see the lovely Miss Carmencita held against her will by a little red-headed youngster, who stood there on the horse's back in her enormous shoes and looked as if she had never done anything except perform in a circus. But the ringmaster didn't laugh. He turned toward an attendant in a red uniform, made a sign for him to go stop the horse. "Is this act already over?" asked Pippi in disappointed tone. "Just when we were having so much fun." "Horrid child," hissed the ringmaster between his teeth. "Get out of here." Pippi looked at him sadly. "Why are you mad at me?" she asked. "What's the matter? I thought we were here to have fun." She skipped off the horse and went back to her seat. But now 2 huge guards came to throw her out. They took hold of her and tried to lift her up. They couldn't do it. Pippi was absolutely still, and it was impossible to budge her, although they tried as hard as they could. At last, they shrugged their shoulders and went off. Meanwhile, the next act had begun. It was Miss Elvira, about to walk the tightrope. She wore a pink tulle skirt and carried a pink parasol in her hand. With delicate little steps, she ran out on the rope. She swung her legs gracefully in the air and did all sorts of tricks. She looked so pretty. She even showed how she could walk backwards on the narrow rope. But when she got back to the little platform at the end of the rope, there stood Pippi. "What are you going to do now?" asked Pippi, delighted, when she saw how astonished Miss Elvira looked. Miss Elvira said nothing at all, but jumped down from the rope and threw her arms around the ringmaster's neck, for he was her father. And the ringmaster once more sent for his guards to throw Pippi out. This time he sent for 5 of them. But all the people shouted, "Let her stay! We want to see the red-headed girl!" And they stamped their feet and clapped their hands. Pippi ran out on the rope, and Miss Elvira's tricks were as nothing compared with Pippi's. When she got to the middle of the rope, she stretched one leg straight up in the air, and her big toe spread out like a roof over her head. She bent her foot a little so that she could tickle herself with it back of her ear. The ringmaster was not at all pleased to have Pippi performing in the circus. He wanted to get rid of her, and so he stole up and loosened the mechanism that held the rope taut, thinking surely Pippi would fall down, but Pippi didn't. She set the rope a-swinging instead. Back and forth it swayed, and Pippi swung faster and faster, until suddenly she leaped out into the air and landed right on the ringmaster. He was so frightened he began to run. "Oh, what a jolly horse!" cried Pippi. "But why don't you have any pom-poms in your hair?" Now Pippi decided it was time to go back to Tommy and Anika. She jumped off the ringmaster and went back to her seat. The next act was about to begin, and there was a brief pause because the ringmaster had to go out and get a drink of water and comb his hair. Then he came in again, bowed to the audience, and said, "Ladies and gentlemen, in a moment you will be privileged to see the greatest marvel of all time, the strongest man in the world, the mighty Adolph, whom no one has yet been able to conquer. Here he comes, ladies and gentlemen. Allow me to present you the mighty Adolph." And into the ring stepped a man who looked as big as a giant. He wore flesh-colored tights and had a leopard skin draped around his stomach. He bowed to the audience and looked very pleased at himself. "Look at these muscles," said the ringmaster, and squeezed the mighty Adolph's arm, where the muscles stood out like balls under the skin. "And now, ladies and gentlemen, I have a very special invitation for you. Who will challenge the mighty Adolph in a wrestling match? Which of you dares to try his strength against the world's strongest man? $100 for anyone who can conquer the mighty Adolph. $100, ladies and gentlemen. Think of that. Who will be the first to try?" Nobody came forth. "What did he say?" asked Pippi. "He says that anyone who can lick that big man will get $100, answered Tommy. "I can," said Pippi. "But I think it would be too bad, too, because he looks nice." "Oh, no, you couldn't," said Anika. "He's the strongest man in the world." "Man, yes," said Pippi. "But I am the strongest girl in the world. Remember that?" Meanwhile, the mighty Adolph was lifting heavy iron weights and bending thick iron rods in the middle, just to show how strong he was. "Oh, come now, ladies and gentlemen," cried the ringmaster. "Is there really anybody here who wants to earn $100? Shall I really be forced to keep this myself?" And he waved the bill in the air. "No, that you certainly won't be forced to do," said Pippi, and stepped over the railing into the ring. The ringmaster was absolutely wild when he saw her. "Get out of here! I don't want to see any more of you," he hissed. "Why do you always have to be so unfriendly?" said Pippi, reproachfully. "I just want to fight with mighty Adolph." "This is no place for jokes," said the ringmaster. "Get out of here before mighty Adolph hears your impromptu nonsense." But Pippi went right by the ringleader and up to mighty Adolph. She took his hand and shook it heartily. "Shall we fight a little, you and I?" she asked. Mighty Adolph looked at her, but didn't understand a word. "In 1 minute, I'll begin," said Pippi. And begin she did. She grabbed mighty Adolph around the waist Before anyone knew what was happening, she had thrown him on the mat. Mighty Adolph leaped up, his face absolutely scarlet. "Atta girl, Pippi!" shrieked Tommy and Anika, so loud that all the people in the circus heard and began to shriek. "Atta girl, Pippi!" too. The ringmaster sat on the railing, wringing his hands. He was mad, but Mighty Adolph was madder. Never in his life had he experienced anything so humiliating as this, and he certainly intended to show that red-headed girl what kind of man Mighty Adolph really was. He rushed at Pippi and caught her around the waist, but Pippi stood from a rock. "You can do better than that," she said to encourage him. Then she wriggled out of his grasp, and in the twinkling of an eye, Mighty Adolph was on the mat again. Pippi stood beside him waiting. She didn't have to wait long. With a roar, he was up again, rushing at her. "Tiddly-pom and piddly-day," said Pippi, as the people in the tent stamped their feet and threw their hats in the air and shouted, "Hooray, Pippi!" When Mighty Adolph came rushing at her for the third time, Pippi lifted him high in the air, and with her arms straight above her, carried him clear around the ring, then laid him down on the mat again and held him there. "Now, little fellow," she said, "I don't think we'll bother about this any more. We'll never have any more fun than we've had already. Pippi is the winner! Pippi is the winner!" cried the people. Mighty Adolph stole out as fast as he could, and the ringmaster had to go up and hand Pippi the $100, although he looked as if he'd much prefer to eat her. "Here you are, young lady, here you are," he said. $100. "That thing?" said Pippi scornfully. "What would I want with that old piece of paper? Take it and use it to fry herring on if you want to." And she went back to her seat. "It's certainly a long circus," she said to Tommy and Anika. "I think I'll take a little snooze, but wake me if they need my help with anything else." And then she lay back in her chair and went to sleep at once. There she lay and snored while the clowns, the sword swallower, and the snake charmer did their tricks for Tommy and Anika and all the rest of the people in the circus. "Just the same, I think Pippi was the best of all," whispered Tommy and Anika. The end.